Well, welcome to part 2 of Plank, Specks, Pearls, and Pigs in the Greatest Story Ever Retold series. We have 2 weeks left before we hit our Lent journey, so we hope that you are all going to participate in that. Today we're joined by Jenna Heuchert, or whatever you want to do.
Parade wave.
We're going to talk about judging again. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay,
Right.
prepare myself.
Would you mind giving an introduction in case anybody doesn't know?
Yeah, so I'm Jenna Heuchert. I am the Sunday morning coordinator for children's ministry here at Element. My husband is Phil and he works on sound. I have 2 kids. My daughter's 4 and my son is almost 18 months. And I've been here about 5.5 years, attending Element for 10.
You know, it's interesting. So you say like, oh, my daughter's 4, my son is 18 months. Well, that makes your son almost 2.
Almost 2, but
so
not almost 2.
When do they go from months to years?
2.
2, yeah.
Oh.
Well, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Before we jump in, Aaron, would you mind giving a recap of the message in case nobody watched it?
Yeah. Today we are talking about Plank, Specks, Pearls, and Pigs Part 2, and we're moving in today to entrusting ourselves and other people to God alone. Usually what happens when we don't entrust other people to God is we have all of our wisdom that we want to share with people so they think the same way that we do, and we get frustrated when they don't. And instead of entrusting people into God's hands, we entrust them into ours. We want to manipulate them in order to think what we think and say what we say. And the only way that we will ever step into someone else's heart and soul is by prayer and walking in places with God. So we need to stop pushing our pearls and simply entrust people to God, that God is going to lead us to the places where we speak the things we need to speak, to say the things we need to say in the timing He tells us to. Again, so often we just want to push our own pearls all the time. And we are called to be a people who speak the truth of the gospel. But we also need to be those who entrust that God knows the timing and the way to bring people to Him. So when we are in those situations, we are willing to speak, but also willing to be silent. We need to be silent.
So how do you discern when to be silent and when to speak truth?
Well, it's interesting because I was having this conversation today that someone called me on the phone and they said, you know, well, this person really needs help and they want this, or they say they want this. They said, we think they need to go to this and do that, and it's kind of a long thing. And after it was over, I just said, you want this person to do these things. Does this person want to do those things? Because if they don't, we're just pushing our pearls at that point. If they don't see the necessity, not that we can't share, hey, I love you, my heart is breaking for you because of these things, but they may even throw that off and say, why do you even care? People have to see the need in their own life for what is going on. So I think we can tell them we love them and tell them whenever they need something to help, we'll be there for that. But pushing our pearls is saying, this is how you're screwing up and this is what you're doing. Not that there isn't places and times to do that, but stepping in and kind of overriding their thoughts or their feelings or where they're at, just trying to get our point across to get them to where we want them to be. And there are times and places where we have to allow God His time to do His work. And as Christians, we find it very hard to allow God His time to do His work.
So is there a time when we ask, what do you want? Like if you're in conversation with somebody, is it okay to ask, do you just want to vent? Do you want to,
Yes.
Do you just want me to be supportive, or do you want to help walk through whatever is going on?
When I start getting frustrated with somebody in a conversation, I will do that. Eventually I'll say, what do you want from me right now? Do you want advice? Are you asking me for advice? Or are you just venting? And if you're just venting, that's okay. I will just sit and listen. Well, not always, because I have a hard time not saying anything at all. But I will think about it differently than if someone's actually asking me for advice. And there is sometimes in places where we give people advice they're not asking for, I think, but God reveals to us those places and those times when we're supposed to do it. Too often we think that everybody in our lives needs our pearls of wisdom every moment. Like, you know, me driving through a roundabout, I want to roll down my window and be like, this is how you drive in the roundabout! And you can't do that because people don't care when you're in the roundabout. But they all need to learn how to drive like me in the roundabout.
I agree.
I've been in the car with you. I think you have yelled at somebody. So Jennifer, do you have any, has anybody given you pearls of wisdom that you rejected?
Yes, actually. So when we were trying to get pregnant with our daughter, because we had very hard time
That's
getting
the
pregnant
worst,
with her.
isn't it? People's pregnancy advice?
Yes, and it's if you just relax and stop trying, it'll come. It's like, no,
had someone try to tell Marianne to wear these earrings.
And when you're literally going through something that is super painful and super hard, and they're just repeating the same thing to you all the time, you're like, okay. So at that point, you just nod.
People a lot of times will come to me and tell me the things that Element should be doing. Like if I listened to every single person who said all the things that Element should be doing, we would have 1 million programs and nobody coming. Nobody in gospel communities, because everybody's stuck in a program somewhere. You need this, or you need that, or you need this. All the time people are doing it. And this is sometimes why it's difficult to continue to stay on the course that we believe that God has set as a church, being about Jesus and gospel communities, because so many people want us to do so many different things, and until God calls us and burns a bush and says do something different, that's where we're going to be. What are the kind of pearls of wisdom has people given you?
One that I used to get a lot, that I still get from some people sometimes, is the God doesn't give you more than you can handle.
Oh.
And honestly, I used to give that.
Because that's not taken out of context at all?
Not at all. Because I was brought up in a church that that's what you told people. And I was like, okay, sure. And then I started coming to Element, and I remember sitting in the McCool GC and Sarah saying, I hate when people tell me this. And I'm like, is it that bad? And then she explained it to me. She was like, God doesn't not give you more he can handle. It's just he goes through it with you. Yeah. I'm like, oh.
And the whole point of having more than we can handle is to trust God in it.
Exactly.
I mean, everything, our entire lives from the day we were born is more than we can handle. And that's why it happens. God teaches us to trust him.
Yeah.
So have you guys had somebody, not necessarily the cliches, but have you had somebody that you loved and wanted to come to know who Christ was and had to stop pushing and trust God, and what did that process look like? I
know I have a friend of mine who, she was raised Catholic, and then her husband is agnostic, and he's like, I'm never, and me and Phil would talk to them so much about if you put your faith and trust in Christ, or if you know who he is, this horrible situation that you're going through, how could you not have him with you? And we would try to give our examples, and he would just shoot it down so much and just start laughing at us. And at that point we realized this is not our time, or it's not going to be us that brings him to Christ if he comes to Christ, or her. It's so hard when you see where their life is and you see what they're going through. How could you not want? You're trying to fill a hole, and that hole can't be filled.
My brother, when I first, became a Christian, I was all zeal and spit and bluster and crazy. And then, there's a time where I was like, what am I doing? And I just backed off and allowed God to do his work. And there's a time he came in to my office and he asked me some questions about certain things, and I gave him a couple books, and it was just kind of this thing of where it's like, what do you need at this time from me? That's what I'm going to give you. And God does his work.
I appreciate your message, kind of after the fake story you told of that.
Ruined it for me.
Yeah, but it is helpful to see that we don't know what people really are going through, and we're quick to judge, and then, at least I do, I hang on to that initial assessment for way too long. But to really stop and see people for who they are, where they are, and that everyone is hurting, and everyone has a story, and everyone needs compassion, and that's who Christ is.
Right.
And that goes back to you were talking earlier about Christ does not demoralize people. He wouldn't call people pigs the way that we understand.
Yeah, and so often people take those verses like that, though. They think, oh yeah, don't cast my pearls before pigs, and it's like he's calling people pigs and dogs, and that's not the point of the passage, and yet so many people walk around thinking that's the point of the passage. Oh, don't cast your pearls before pigs. And people take that as, oh, don't share the gospel with that person, that drug addict. That is not what Jesus is saying. I mean, the whole thing is about entrusting ourselves to God's care, and when we do, we live our lives differently.
Jenna, so I know your kids are a little young, but going to the Tony Dungey story, do you have any experience of you're trying to give your kids this pearl and then they ignore it, but then somebody else says it and they're like, oh, cool.
But Phil's trying to teach her how to like skateboard. So she got a skateboard for Christmas. And so he's like teaching her how to skateboard. He's like, okay, you got to do this. You got to do this. And she's just throwing fits. She's like, I don't want to do it like that. I want to do it like this. He's like, you're never going to learn to ride your skateboard. Little girl across the street comes over. She's like, hey, Annie, you need to do this and this. And she's like, okay. And now she's like standing up and like scooting. We're just like, really? Really?
It's Tony Dungey.
Oh, it kills me. And I mean, I get it. When mom and dad say it, it's like, okay, mom, like, but I can do it. Whereas if her best friend across the street tells her, it's like, well, she's way cooler than you. So, because I have heard that said by her.
I've had people say, oh, you're a pastor, you're supposed to say that, you know, and not realizing that there's any wisdom in the thing. And then years later, they'll come back and be like, man, I so should have listened to what you said. Some of it's marriage stuff. Some of it's, you know, school, growing up kind of things. And, you know, the older you get, you know, I think the more wisdom that people are supposed to have anyway. And you can share that when people ask, but sometimes people don't listen. And then later in life, they're like, man, I so should have listened to what you said. I say that all the time to people.
I do too.
So kind of in the middle of the message, you talked about how kids who kind of grew up in the church, if they have a multi-generational team, family, group investing in them, pouring into them, they're more likely to continue walking in faith. And so I wanted to ask, as we end, kind of, how can we be better at that? How can we notice the younger kids in our midst, and how can we invest?
I think that it's important for people sometimes get frustrated in gospel communities. Like they'll start off with, I want a gospel community of people who are just like me. And then they get a bunch of people around who are just like them. And then all of a sudden it goes a little bit later and they're like, we need some younger people. We need some older people. We need this, we need that. And instead of starting like that, instead of trusting us in our pearls of wisdom that says we want multi-generational gospel communities.
Because I've been there where it wasn't, and I know.
Right.
It just becomes a cesspool.
It does. And so when there's wisdom that comes from, this is really what you're going to want. So I know you don't think that, oh, it's so hard, these people don't get me, but you need that. You need those different people of different ages coming together because you're going to want those. And then other people, you know, after they're in it for a bit, they're like, well, I just want this, because they want something new. And it's like, why don't you stick where you are and invite either somebody else in or bring some of these ideas with you into this thing, because it's not, the new thing isn't, the grass isn't greener. If it is, it's been mowed more and been watered more. So just water your grass and start to mow it where you are. Do the things that you want to be done. And I mean, that's some pearls of wisdom. Grow, because if you have kids, you want people to grow, get that multi-generational around the community you have right now. Invite people in.
Yeah, I definitely think that the GCs here are so big because, like, you guys know my children are not the easiest ones ever.
What?
So they're perfect. So when we're in GC, like, Annie will respond really well to like Manette opposed to me, or like Christy. It's like Simon and Annie are all about Christy. So I want my kids to be able to have that, like, to go, like, in 15 years when Annie's 19 and dealing with issues, like, she could go to her if she can't come to me. Because I had, growing up, I mean, I was very involved in my church. I was in almost every ministry, and I had so many different age groups of people surrounding me. Like, my closest friend was 10 years older than I was. My youth pastor and his wife, I would go on family vacations with them. And so having them surrounding my life made me feel like I didn't have to go to my mom if I had issues. I could go to them, know it was a safe place, and then they would be able to speak truth into my life that was about Christ. So that's what I want for my kids. And I hope that's what we can do in the children's ministry too, like with our teachers. I mean,
it's interesting though, as a church kind of grows and gets a little older and things like that, there's people who are like, well, I can't watch kids. Kids don't want to be around me. I'm too old. You know, I had this youth leader when I was a youth pastor who was like, oh, I'm too old. And I'm like, you are perfect. Kids need these different age ranges of people involved in their lives.
Yeah. But I think that that's really a key point too in like raising your kids around people like with GCs. Like, they can see us sharing our lives with each other and sharing, like, not necessarily pearls that no one wants, but I mean, wisdom in each other's lives. Like, they're seeing, like, okay, they can trust this person, they can trust this person and this person. I can then trust these people.
And I think that goes into it too, that seeing a community love each other through good times and bad helps everyone grow more mature.
Right. I think it's good for kids to see that, and for, like, if we want them to continue to, like, walk in Christ and grow and own their faith, and they need to be open to hearing the word. And if they're closed off because they see mommy and daddy are closed off, I don't know, I think it's the whole example, setting the example. Because I think that's the like, there's so many times you can throw pearls at people, but it's like, how about you show it too? Like, you can't just, like, throw your wisdom at people and then not expect, like, not open yourself up to it too.
Yeah.
Good point. Very good point. And on that,
on that bombshell,
we're going to end this episode. Next week, we're going to take a long walk. So join us as we talk about the long way around. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. This was fun.
Good. Appreciate it. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
one day people are going to be like, what are checks?
Annie took it out of our drawer and was like, can I color on this? I said, get out of here.
No, she said, can I color on this?
Here's a pearl for you.
Like a
checkbook is
like a old smoker woman. Can I color on this? I know she does.
It's so creepy.
Well, your husband said it's because she's either screaming or talking all the time. She doesn't stop.